Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's Tim here. Today I'll be documenting my journey on So You Want to Be a SOC Analyst Lab provided by Eric Capuano. So Eric Capuano, he's the founder of OpenSOC, put together this gem. This blog is extremely well documented and walks you through setting up your own hands-on lab. He made it after realizing a lot of people were struggling to get real experience for an entry-level SOC analyst position. If you want to stand out from other applicants, I highly recommend adding this one to your resume. The lab consists of setting up a small virtualized environment utilizing 2 virtual machines, in which we'll be deploying a command and control server with Sliver. This is to simulate real-world threats. We'll also be collecting and analyzing telemetry using Sysmon and LimaCharlie, creating and tuning detection and response rules for threat detection, investigating indicators of compromise from system and network logs, utilizing YARA to scan for malware and detect malicious activity, and blocking and responding to attacks in our simulated SOC environment. So my host system is Windows 11 Pro, and I'm running my virtualized environment on VMware. For the attack VM, I installed Ubuntu Server 22.04.1 via ISO image. During the install, I left everything on default, and I changed the network IPv4 to manual. Copy this IPv4 address to your address field. Make sure you guys remember this IP because we'll be using it later. Now go to your virtual network editor and go to your NAT settings and plug these IPs into your static configuration. The subnet IP would need a -24 added to it. If your host machine is on a Mac, this is the folder directory for your NAT settings. For my name, I entered in user. For my server name, I entered in attack. For my username, I entered in user. For a password, I entered in password. Install OpenSSH server, check yes. Make sure you guys continue installing the OS until it says installation is completed. After rebooting the Ubuntu install, log in with the credentials we defined earlier. In my case, it's user and password. Make sure DNS and outbound pings are working by pinging google.com. Now let's head over to our Windows 11 VM. I installed Windows 11 via an ISO file using VMware. Once you finish installing Windows, the first thing we're going to do is disable Microsoft Defender so it won't interfere with any of our attacks. So let's go ahead and click the Start menu icon, click Settings, click Privacy and Security on the left, click Windows Security, click Virus and Threat Protection. Under Virus and Threat Protection settings, click Manage Settings. Toggle off each of these switches, and when prompted, click Yes. We are also going to be turning off Microsoft Defender via registry. Copy the following command into an administrative terminal and press Enter. Next, we'll prepare to boot into safe mode to disable all Microsoft Defender services. Click the Start menu icon and type msconfig into the search bar. Go to the Boot tab and under Boot Options, check for Safe Boot in Minimal. Now click Apply and press OK, and the system will restart into safe mode. Now in safe mode, we'll disable some services via registry. Click the Start menu icon and type regedit into the search bar. For each of the following registry locations, you'll need to browse to the key, find the start value, and change it to 4. Now let's leave safe mode the same way we got into it. Once again, click the Start menu icon, type msconfig into the search bar, uncheck the box for Safe Boot under the Boot tab, click Apply and OK. Now the system will restart into a normal desktop environment, now Defender free. Let's prevent the VM from going into standby. Enter the following command into an administrative command prompt and press Enter. Now let's install a host-based monitoring tool called Sysmon. Eric suggests that it's a must-have security analyst tool for getting very granular telemetry. Now let's launch an administrative PowerShell instance and run the following commands. First, we're going to download Sysmon with the following command, then unzip the sysmon.zip file. We are then going to download and install Swift on Security Sysmon configuration with the following 2 commands. Now let's validate Sysmon 64 is installed and running. Now let's set up LimaCharlie as our SecOps cloud platform as well as our endpoint detection and response system. We'll sign up for an account. Once logged into LimaCharlie, create an organization and enter a unique name. For data residency, I put USA. Template is Extended Detection and Response Standard. Once the organization is created, click Add Sensor. We'll select Windows, select Create New, and enter in Windows VM-Lab. Click Create, select the installation key we just created. Click EXE, open up an administrative PowerShell prompt, and CD into your Downloads folder. We are then going to download the sensor.exe. Make sure you're changing the user like I am if applicable. After downloading the sensor, we're going to shift into a standard command prompt by running cmd.exe. Next, I'll type the name of the installer file with the .exe, then after a space, paste the command line argument from LimaCharlie. If everything worked correctly, you should see agent installed successfully, and in the LimaCharlie web UI, you should see the sensor reporting in as well. Next, we'll configure LimaCharlie to also ship the Sysmon event logs alongside its own EDR telemetry. In the left side menu, click Artifact Collection. Next, we'll click Add Artifact Collection rule. The name will be Windows Sysmon-logs. Pattern, welcome Microsoft Windows Sysmon operational. Retention period, 10. Our platform is going to be Windows. Then we'll click Save Rule. LimaCharlie will now start shipping Sysmon logs, which provide EDR-like telemetry. Some of this overlaps with LimaCharlie's own data, but Sysmon is still a powerful visibility tool that works well alongside any EDR agent. We are also ingesting Sysmon logs because the Sigma rules we enabled rely on them. Now would be a good time to save a snapshot of your Windows VM in case of any errors. That way you could always revert back to a clean snapshot later. From my host machine, we'll SSH onto the Ubuntu server to make our lives easier by copy and pasting the following commands. I use SSH to access the server using the assigned IP address we copied down earlier. We're going to enter in our password. Then we're going to switch to our root user. This is where we're going to paste our commands. As you can see, we're going to install Sliver, our C2 framework by Bishop Fox, along with some additional commands. Then we're going to make a working directory with the following command. Now let's jump into an SSH session on our Linux machine and generate our payload. Drop into a root shell and change directory to our Sliver install. Launch Sliver server using sliver-server, and now we can generate our payload, which will be using our Linux IP, and we'll save it to our Sliver install directory. Confirm our new implant configuration by typing implants. Make sure you keep note of your payload name. Now we have our C2 payload ready to infect our Windows VM. Let's go ahead and exit Sliver for now. And to easily download our payload to our Windows VM, we could spin up a temporary web server using Python. In our Windows VM, launch an administrative PowerShell console and run the following command to download our payload to the Downloads folder. Swap your own Linux IP, payload name, and in my case, the user as well. After the payload is installed, now would be a good time to snapshot your Windows VM before we execute the malware. Now that our payload is installed in our Windows VM, we need to relaunch Sliver, but first we need to terminate the Python web server by pressing Ctrl+C. Now relaunch Sliver and start the HTTP listener. Return to our Windows VM, run our c2 payload.exe that's in our Downloads folder. There are a few ways to do this, but I just used command prompt. Within a few moments, we should see our session check in our Sliver server. We'll verify our session in Sliver, taking note of the session ID by entering sessions. To interact with our new C2 session, we'll type in the use command along with our session ID into the Sliver shell. We are now interacting directly with our C2 session on our Windows VM. Let's run a few basic commands to get our bearing on the victim host. To get basic info about the session, enter info. To find out what user your implant is running as and learn its privileges, type who am I followed by get privs. If the implant is properly run with admin rights, we'll notice we have a few privileges that make further attacking much easier, such as SE debug privilege. We'll identify our implant's working directory by entering pwd. Examine network connections occurring on the remote system by entering netstat. Notice that Sliver clearly highlights its own process in green and any detection countermeasures in red. We'll identify running processes on the remote system by entering in ps-t. Once again, we'll notice the Sliver highlights its own process in green and indicates security products. This is how attackers become aware of what security products a victim system may be using. We could observe our EDR telemetry so far by going into LimaCharlie, click Sensors on the left menu, click your active Windows sensor, and on the left side menu for the sensor, click Processes. Here we could spend some time exploring what is returned in the process tree. Eric provides a link to the free poster download from the SANS Institute, which is a guide for what's normal and not within a Windows host system. Here we could find our C2 implant, which is active on the network. Now we could click on the network tab on the left side menu once again, using Ctrl F to search and find our implant name. Now we'll click the File System tab on the left side menu. Browse to the location we know our implant to be running from. Inspect the hash of the suspicious executable by scanning it with VirusTotal. While it says scan with VirusTotal, what it's actually doing is querying VirusTotal for the hash of the exe. If the file is a common or well-known malware sample, you'll know it right away. However, item not found on VirusTotal does not mean that this file is innocent, just that it has not been seen before by VirusTotal. This makes sense because we generated this payload ourselves. This actually makes the file even more suspicious because nearly everything has been seen by VirusTotal. However, I found out since the hash hasn't been seen by VirusTotal, we can actually scan our implant.exe and it will show that it is in fact malicious. Now we'll click Timeline on the left side menu. This is a near real-time view of EDR telemetry and event logs streaming from the system. We can filter this timeline with known indicators of compromise, such as the name of our implant. If we scroll back far enough, we should be able to find the moment our implant was created on the system, and the network connections it created immediately after. Now let's do some adversarial activities we'd like to detect. We'll get back onto our SSA session on our Ubuntu VM and drop into a C2 session on your victim. Run the following commands within Sliver session on your victim host. We'll do something adversaries commonly do for stealing credentials on a system. Dump the LSAS.exe process from memory. This will dump the remote process from memory and save it locally on your Sliver C2 server. If it fails for an unknown reason, even after launching your C2 payload with admin rights on a Windows system, it would likely still generated the telemetry we needed. Now that we've done something adversarial, we'll switch over to LimaCharlie to find the relevant telemetry since LSAS.exe is a known sensitive process. Any good EDR will generate events for this. Let's go ahead and drill into the timeline of our Windows VM sensor and use the event type filter to filter for the sensitive process access events. There will likely be many of these, but pick any one of them as there isn't much else on the system that will legitimately be accessing LSAS. Now that we know what the event looks like when credential access occurred, we have what we need to craft a detection and response rule that would alert anytime this activity occurs. We'll click on the Build a D&R rule button from this event. In the Detect section of the new rule, remove all contents and replace them with this. We're specifying that this detection should only look at sensitive process access events where the victim or target process ends with lsas.exe. In the response section of the new rule, remove all contents and replace them with this. We're telling LimaCharlie to simply generate a detection report anytime this detection occurs. We could ultimately tell this rule to do all sorts of things, like terminate the offending process chain and so on. Now let's test our rule against the event we built it for. LimaCharlie has carried over that event, and it provides a quick and easy way to test the D&R logic. We'll scroll back up and click Save Rule and give it the name LSAS Accessed, and be sure it is enabled. We'll now return to our Sliver server console, back into our C2 session, and rerun our same procdump command from earlier. If at some point the C2 session dies, just relaunch the malware with the steps from earlier. After rerunning the procdump command, go to the Detections tab on the LimaCharlie left side menu. We've just detected a threat with our own detection signature. We'll expand the detection to see the raw event. We can also go straight to the timeline where this event occurred by clicking View Event Timeline from the detection entry. So far, we've learned that we can craft our own detection rules to identify the moment a threat unfolds on our Windows system. But we're now interested in blocking the threat rather than just generating an alert. We're going to craft a rule that would be very effective at disrupting a ransomware attack by looking for predictable action that ransomware tends to take: deletion of volume shadow copies. Volume shadow copies provide a convenient way to restore individual files or even an entire file system to a previous state, which makes it a very attractive option for recovering from a ransomware attack. For this reason, it's become very predictable that one of the first signs of an impending ransomware attack is the deletion of volume shadow copies. A basic command that would accomplish this is by entering this. This command is not one that will be run often, if ever, in healthy environments, But baselining is still crucial as some backup software and other applications may do things like this on occasion. So now we have a prime candidate for a blocking rule: low false positive prevalence, high threat activity. In our Sliver C2 shell on the victim, here we are going to run a basic command we're looking to detect and block. Let's enter in shell. When prompted with, "This action is bad, OPSEC. Are you an adult?" type Y and hit enter. In the new system shell, we'll run the following command. The output is not important as there may or may not be volume shadow copies available on the VM to be deleted, but running the command is sufficient to generate the telemetry we need. Next, we'll run the whoami command to verify we still have an active system shell. We'll browse over to LimaCharlie's detection tab to see if default Sigma rules picked up on our activities. We'll click to expand the detection and examine all of the metadata contained within the detection itself. One of the great things about Sigma rules is they are enriched with references to help you understand why the detection exists in the first place. One of the reference URLs contains a YARA signature written by Florian Roth that contains several or more possible command lines that we want to consider in a very robust detection rule. View the offending event in the timeline to see the raw event that generated this detection. Next, we'll craft a detection and response rule from this event. From this DNR rule template, we can begin crafting our response action that will take place when this activity is observed. Add the following response rule to the response section. The action report section simply fires off a detection report to the detections tab. The action tasks section is what is responsible for killing the parent process, responsible with the deny tree for the VSS admin delete shadows all command. Save your rule with the following name. Now we'll return to our Sliver C2 session and rerun the command and see what happens. We'll run the command to delete volume shadows. The command should succeed, but the action of running the command is what will trigger our DNR rule. Now, to test if our DNR rule properly terminated the parent process, check to see if you still have an active system shell by rerunning the whoami command. If our DNR rule worked successfully, the system shell will hang and fail to return anything from the whoami command because the parent process was terminated. This is effective because in a real ransomware scenario, the parent process is likely the ransomware payload or lateral movement tool that would be terminated in this case. Next, we're going to take advantage of a more advanced capability of our EDR sensor, which is to automatically scan files or processes for the presence of malware based on a YARA signature. YARA is a tool primarily used for identifying and classifying malware based on textual or binary patterns. It allows researchers and security professionals to craft rules that describe unique characteristics of specific malware families or malicious behaviors. When analyzing a compromised system, YARA helps in sifting through large amounts of data to find malicious artifacts by matching them against a set of predefined rules. This ability to create customized detection signatures is particularly useful in threat hunting and incident response. We are going to prepare our LimaCharlie instance for detecting certain file system and process activities in order to trigger YARA scans. Since we already know we're dealing with the Sliver C2 payload, we can be more targeted in our exercise by using a signature specifically looking for Sliver. Within LimaCharlie, browse to Automation YARA Rules. Under Automation YARA Rules, click Add YARA Rule. Name the rule Sliver. We'll copy and paste the contents of this code into the rule block and then save the rule. Now before we use these YARA rules, we want to set up a few generic DNR rules that will generate alerts whenever a YARA detection arises. Browse to Automation D and R rules. Create a new rule. In the detect block, paste the following. Notice that we're detecting on YARA detections not involving a process object. That'll be its own rule shortly. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. We'll save the rule and title it YARA detection. Create a new rule. In the detect block, paste the following. We notice that this detection is looking for YARA detections specifically involving a process object. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. We'll save the rule and title it YARA detection in memory. We can test our signature by initiating a manual YARA scan using the EDR sensor. This will let us know everything is working up to this point. In LimaCharlie, we'll browse to the sensors list and click on our Windows VM sensor. Now we'll access the EDR sensor console, which allows us to run sensor commands against this endpoint. We'll run the following command to initiate a manual YARA scan of our Sliver payload. Hit enter twice to execute this command. The output indicates a positive hit on one of the signatures contained within the Sliver YARA rule. Now we'll also confirm that we have a new detection on the detection screen. To automatically YARA scan downloaded EXEs, we'll browse to Automation D and R rules. We'll create a new rule and in the detect block paste the following. We notice that this detection is simply looking for new EXE files to appear in any user's download directory. In the respond block, we'll paste the following. This response action generates an alert for the EXE creation, but more importantly, kicks off a YARA scan using the Sliver signature against the newly created EXE. Save the rule and title it YARA scan downloaded EXE. To automatically YARA scan processes launched from the downloads directory, we'll browse to Automation D and R rules. We'll create a new rule and in the detect block, paste the following. This rule is matching any process that is launched from a user downloads directory. In the respond block, paste the following. Notice in this rule, we're no longer scanning the file path, but the actual running process by specifying its process ID. We are also now using the other YARA rule we created, Sliver process. The YARA rules switched here due to the NCSC rules not firing on running versions of Sliver due to the specific logic they've used in the match condition. The logic has been loosened to detect strings that should be present in a running Sliver beacon. We'll save the rule and title it YARA scan process launched from downloads. We won't re-download our Sliver payload, but we'll simulate this activity by moving it to another location, then putting it back into the user downloads folder. We'll run the following PowerShell command to move our Sliver payload from downloads to documents. We'll now put it back to generate the new document event for an EXE being dropped into the downloads folder. Now we'll head over to our detections tab and see what happened. We should see an initial alert for EXE drop in downloads directory followed shortly by a YARA detection once the scan began and found Sliver inside the EXE. Now we'll test our new process rule to scan running processes launched from downloads. We'll launch an administrative PowerShell prompt. First, we'll kill any existing instances of our Sliver C2 from previous labs. We'll execute our Sliver payload to create new process event. We need to trigger the scanning of a process launch from the downloads directory. We should see an initial alert for execution from downloads directory, followed shortly by a YARA detection in memory once the scan kicked off and found Sliver inside the EXE.